Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Unsolved Crimes with me, Paul Rexdale. And in this latest episode, we take a look at the murder of Wendy Sewell. For 27 years, the small town of Bakewell has been living with guilt. Children born long after the horrific event of that chilly, sunny day cheerfully rattle off the tale of the young woman with questionable morals who was in the graveyard on the edge of town, and how a gentle, mentally disabled boy was fitted up for the crime. The 1973 murder of Wendy Sewell, the woman dubbed the Bakewell Tart with a taste for illicit, outdoor sex, and who slipped Mars bars into the hands of men who took her fancy, an unmistakable sexual signal for those who had lived through the 60s. She didn't conceal what she did during those lunch breaks, claimed a local who lived near Sewell on the outskirts of town. She never tried to hide what she was like. There was no point. It was a small town and everyone knew what she was at. There's plenty of evidence that Sewell was not shy. Other locals relate how when her husband used to leave for work in the mornings, she would turn a light on in the porch to signal that the coast was clear. During one of the couple's many breakups, she rented a room over a wool shop where she met men until she was asked to leave. When she gave birth to a son and had it adopted, at least 3 men believed themselves to be the father. Sewell and her husband David had forged some sort of reconciliation at the time of her murder and were once again living under the same roof. There was no indication that she had tempered her behaviour, however, and colleagues remember how she spoke about an argument she had had with her current boyfriend the night before she disappeared. At 12 p.m, she received a phone call or a visit in the office, and her boss, on the other phone in the other room, remembered hearing raised voices before Sewell popped in with a note telling him she was nipping out for lunch. A friend who met her rushing up the hill a few minutes later said Sewell was excited and it indicated she was on her way to meet her boyfriend to make up after having argued. At 1 p.m, Downing stoked the fire in the chapel, slung his coat around his shoulders and headed home to feed the 2 baby hedgehogs he had rescued and have a bite of lunch with his mother. As he walked up the long path from the back of the graveyard to the front entrance, he later told police he remembered seeing Wendy striding back and forth behind the chapel on a parallel path close to the wood. He took no notice and walked on. 5 witnesses saw him leaving the graveyard at this time with this characteristic unhurried shambling gait, and by the time his mother returned home, not more than 7 minutes later, Downing had already boiled the kettle and was in the garage changing his boots. Around 1:20 p.m, Downing left home and, waving to the man in the graveyard gatehouse, walked back to the shed. No more than 5 minutes later, he was back hammering on the gatehouse door and shouting about a woman who had been attacked. His return coincided with the arrival of 3 workmen who went with him to where he had left Sewell. She was still alive and, at their approach, got to her feet and began stumbling around. The men watched as she tripped and fell, smashing her head against a gravestone. Hale believes that it was this final fall that killed her. Had she been restrained or laid still, her life might never have ended, and Downing's nightmare would never have begun. She was still alive by the time the police and ambulance arrived, but was unconscious by the time she reached the hospital. Downing was pulled in immediately for questioning, although the police insisted he was merely helping them out. He was neither cautioned nor allowed a solicitor. The boy, already in a state of severe shock, was questioned for 9 hours. Downstairs, they sent away his father, who arrived 6 times to pick up his son. They wrote out a confession in pencil full of words Downing didn't understand, saying he had murdered Sewell and sexually attacked her between 12:50 and 1:08 p.m, which they eventually persuaded him to sign in ink. By the time Sewell had died 2 days later without regaining consciousness, Downing was banged to rights. He's now a middle-aged man with the lowered eyes and bowed shoulders of one who has spent his formative adult years being beaten into submission alongside some of Britain's most notorious murderers. At the time, Wendy Sewell had not yet died, so Downing was initially charged with assault. When she later died, the charge was upgraded to murder. Downing soon retracted his confession, saying he had only admitted guilt because he believed she would survive. In February 1974, Downing was tried at Nottingham Crown Court. He pleaded not guilty to murder but admitted to sexually assaulting Sewell after finding her injured. Forensic evidence was presented claiming the blood on his clothes could only belong to the attacker. After just 1 hour of deliberation, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to detention at Her Majesty's pleasure and served 27 years in prison. Because Downing maintained his innocence, he was classed as in denial and repeatedly denied parole. His case faded from public view until the 1990s, when his family contacted Don Hale, editor of the Matlock Mercury. Hale launched a high-profile campaign claiming Downing was the victim of a miscarriage of justice, focusing on police misconduct and the reliability of the confession. In 2001, Downing was released pending appeal, and in January 2002, the Court of Appeal quashed his conviction, ruling that his confession was unsafe due to the way it had been obtained. The court stressed that the issue was not whether Downing was innocent, but whether the original conviction was safe. Following his release, Derbyshire Police re-investigated the case in Operation Noble, interviewing around 1,600 witnesses. All alternative suspects were eliminated. Downing, however, could not be ruled out. Police also claimed he had confessed to the murder several times after his release, including on a secretly recorded tape, but he refused to be formally re-interviewed. Despite remaining the sole suspect, Downing could not be retried under double jeopardy laws in place at the time. When the law changed in 2005, police applied to recharge him, but the Crown Prosecution Service ruled the evidence was not strong enough. Meanwhile, Don Hale's book, Town Without Pity, came under heavy criticism for inaccuracies and speculation, including claims about Wendy Sewell's personal life that police said were untrue. Although charges against Hale were considered, none were brought. The case has continued to provoke debate. Alternative theories, including links to the Yorkshire Ripper, have been raised and dismissed. As of today, no one has been convicted of Wendy Sewell's murder. Stephen Downing served 27 years in prison, received compensation after his conviction was overturned, and remains a free man. Officially, the case is closed. Unofficially, it remains one of the most controversial and troubling cases in British legal history. A story of brutal violence, flawed justice, and unanswered questions. So, who do you think the culprit was? Was it Sewell's husband? Her boyfriend? Was it Downing after all? Or was it someone completely different who has evaded the law all these years? As always, please drop your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe so you never miss an episode of Unsolved Crimes. Until next time, stay safe.